0, 1.
Let's get started.
Hey everybody, welcome back to this week's episode of Texas Narcos podcast. Today I'm very excited to have a special guest, Chad Hammons, on the show. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different than y'all are used to. Today we're going to be talking about the spiritual and the emotional health of the law enforcement officer. Chad was gracious enough to come on the show today. He is a pastor and a police chaplain. He spent a lot of time doing that, so I'm going to let him kind of introduce himself here in just a minute. But first, we're going to do, as we do in every episode, everybody gets a gift. We got a Texas Narcos t-shirt there for you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yes, sir. So, Chad, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself? Where are you from? How'd you get into, being a chaplain, that kind of stuff?
So I'm from the South Texas area, closer to the coast, and I've always loved law enforcement my whole life. It was just, I was never one of the clients. I was always, rooting for the cops. And
Right.
A few years ago now, it's been probably 10 to 12 years ago now, in our town, we had a really tragic event happen. We had a guy he lost his mind, and he had 3 or 4 children. At least 2 of them were in car seats or strapped in,
Mm-hmm.
and out in his front yard, he shot and killed his kids.
Wow.
And then he turned the gun on himself, shot and killed himself, and he shot his wife too. Out of all of it, his wife survived. Nobody else made it. And that was the event in the town that led the police chief to say, "Hey, I think maybe we need to have some chaplains as
Right.
part of our department." And so from there, they put out the call to the area pastors, and I heard about it, and I was really anxious to be a part of that. So we went through the training, did all of those things, and that's how we got started.
Okay.
And it's been I loved it from day one.
I got you. Now, how long ago was that, you said?
It's somewhere around 10 to 12 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you were pastoring a local church there in town that you were living in?
Yeah.
Okay. And was it just you as a chaplain, or did it, start with maybe just you? Did it, were there other people who jumped on board, or?
It started with somewhere around 16 or 18 of us.
Okay.
There was quite a few, and the town's not big. The
Right.
town was less than 20,000 people.
Okay.
But a lot of guys got on board, and as time passed, some bowed out, and
Yeah.
at the end but before we moved, it ended up being there was only a couple of us.
I got you.
Yeah.
So, how long were you the pastor of the church over there?
Man, altogether, about from being either the head or just on staff, about 30
Okay.
years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
How'd you get into being involved with the church, as far as, being a pastor, or, helping to lead a church? How did that all get started for you?
Man, I've been in church my whole life.
Right.
And just as I got older, I just knew that was part of my future, and ended up actually marrying the pastor's daughter.
There you go.
And couple years later, came on board and on staff, and just kind of worked from there.
Cool. I assume you enjoyed it. I mean,
Oh,
it
yeah.
was
Oh, yeah.
it's a rewarding job, getting to help people and whatnot, and then step into the role of helping out with the people there, the cops in your town. So, as a police chaplain there, what is some of the duties or the cool things that you got to do with them? Did you go on ride outs with them? Did you, participate in any of their functions, or, kind of how was that?
Yeah, so the police chief was really just open, and I felt like he was generous to us.
Right.
Once we finished all that and started going, we did everything. Our primary role was we were there for the officers themselves, or for the the staff of
Right.
the PD, and so I did everything. They let us go. Most of what we did was ride along.
Okay.
And so I rode with almost, I think, every single officer, and I did it once. Personally, I did it once a week for a day,
Uh-huh.
anywhere from 8 to 12 hours. I would what I would always think, oh, I'm going to go home. I'm going to go for 4 hours today. Then I'm like, no, I want to stay for the whole shift,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And so I was with them for everything from the chases to I got to go on SWAT runs. I was safe. I was way like behind the
Right.
lieutenant, you know,
Right.
but eventually they gave me a vest and said, hey, man, you're out there all the time. So take one of these. And they
That's
wouldn't let me
awesome.
have a gun, but it's
Yeah.
okay.
Well,
You know,
at least they gave you a vest. That's good.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I saw the fights. Everybody thought I was a cop because we had our uniform, and
Right.
obviously the officers knew, but the general public thought
That was
we were
a-
just one of them.
right. Right.
So I got threatened like they did. I got all the stuff, and
Yeah.
it
Well,
wasn't too bad.
yeah, you really got to see um, firsthand the environment that the officers in
Oh
today's
yeah,
day and age are having to deal with and what they're having to work, against just to try to help the community.
right.
I would assume that would help you to be able to better connect and better serve them in the capacity of a chaplain.
Yeah, because I got to see exactly what they're going through, and um, it's different seeing it from that side.
Right.
It's a whole different world, which and but it's um, you get to see how they experience their everyday life. And the truth is, going through it, I figured out real quick that being a police officer and being the pastor of the church were a whole lot more similar than I thought.
Okay.
Um, and I'm not making fun of church people, but
Right.
a cop out there, especially, well, I guess all of them, right?
Right.
But if you're dealing with people every single day, every day people lie to you.
Right.
They're not being honest with you, or they only tell you part of the story to make
Right.
themselves look good.
Right.
Certainly they withhold things. Well, I'm like, that's I do that. That's what people do. They want
Right.
help.
Right.
They call you and say, "Can you help me?" But they only give you a little bit,
Right.
and you're supposed to figure out the rest,
Right.
and have the answers for them to fix it right then.
Right.
And so, I was pretty amazed. Like, wow, this is almost the same thing.
Right. And then if the advice you give them on either side, being a cop or the pastor of the church, if you give them some advice and it doesn't work out the way they think it should have, it's your fault now.
It's your fault. And then even a little further than that, most of the time, they're not going to follow your advice.
Right. Yeah, that's true. That's true. That's I never thought about it that way, but that's definitely, they do have some parallels. So, how important is it, based on your experience, for a law enforcement officer to both be spiritually healthy as well as mentally healthy in order to do their jobs effectively, and not only do their jobs at work but also do the jobs that they have at home? Because they go out there on patrol or whatever their assignment is and they work their shift, and then they come home and they have a whole nother job at home with their family and their kids and whatever else they have going on. How important is it to have that spiritual foundation and the spiritual grounding, to go along with in accompaniment with their mental health?
I think it's huge. If I can go back to the story of how the chaplain started in
Right.
our area. So once we started riding along, I was with several officers. I eventually rode with all the officers that were on duty that day.
Mm-hmm.
And every single one of them actually took me in their patrol car, and they took me down close to the area where it all happened. And they're like, I was right here. I was right here when the call dropped, and the girl on the phone couldn't give them an address. So now they're just frantically trying to find as best they can this location where this guy's, killing his children, but they couldn't make it.
Right.
And so one of them in particular was like, I was 17 seconds away, but I couldn't get there in time.
Wow.
And so from that, then it took a little bit of time to build the trust, and then from the thing, realized, hey, this guy's just here for us. But once that happened, several of them said, I had to go see, the psychiatrist or the doctor over this. Like this one right here, which you got 3 or 4 dead babies.
Right.
Like, I can't take it. So several of them began to take meds.
Right.
Because they were really struggling with that. And even I remember one in particular telling me I had to make sure I went by the morgue to make sure this guy was dead.
Mm. Wow.
Because I couldn't even sleep until I knew that for sure he was dead.
Right.
And so they were dealing with. I mean, that's horrific. I mean,
Right.
it's awful.
Yeah.
And the I recognized that the ones that had a connection to God, ones that had a spiritual background, like, hey, I'm gonna, I need God's help. They seemed to come through it. It was hard on everybody, but they seemed to come through it with some hope.
Okay.
And then the ones that didn't, they managed, but it's like when you watch them, it's like more difficult. And then it seems that they struggle with other things. And I would say probably one of the biggest things when it comes to the spiritual side is you have that hope.
Right.
Like, okay, like humanity can be awful. And it's really easy to see how you can get jaded and all of those things because of what you deal with all the time. But the ones that are connected and have a spiritual sense and they're doing their best to follow God, they're able to kind of get through that.
Right.
And then at home, they're able to break through that and not carry that, be so jaded at home or carry work at home, which anybody can do. It's not just officers for sure, but just dealing with the day to day, everybody lying to your face and all of those things, it becomes so hard. And I think it's hope. To me, one of the biggest things is hope when it comes to the spiritual side of things.
Right. Yeah, it can definitely change your outlook on the world. I mean, it's it can harden you.
Oh yeah.
It can harden the way you look at, all sorts of people. From the guy walking down the street, you're automatically, checking him out, you're sizing him up, trying to see, is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? And it's all the things that you need to do and that all the things that are required of you while you're working to stay alive and stay on the top of your game. But it is definitely hard to switch that off when you get home.
Yeah.
Whenever you're asking your kid a question and they tell you, a lie, and you're automatically going into cop mode where you're like, well, no, you're lying to me. And and a lot of times they are, but at the same time, there's other times that they're not, and they are telling you the truth, but you just, you have your distrust for everybody,
Yep.
and, that's definitely it's definitely an issue,
It is. And honestly, and I only did this one day a week, right? I wasn't on the, full shift all week long. It even kind of made me be that way a little bit.
Right.
And I had to like, okay, hang on, wait a minute. So I can understand you're just all the time.
Yeah.
It can be difficult.
Yeah. In your experience dealing with these officers and stuff that have been exposed to a traumatic incident, what type of stigma did you notice inside the law enforcement community around the idea of whether you want to call it PTSD or just like a response to trauma? These officers were exposed to a traumatic event in that particular incident. Also, almost every day, right? Did you notice any sort of a stigma or where officers were afraid to come forward or afraid to ask for help or afraid to talk to somebody because they were afraid they were going to be called weak or anything like that? Did that type of situation ever arise?
They would. I never had any of them say it outright like that, but you can feel it.
Right.
I have, I would have officers call because they all have my number, and they would call and they're like, "Hey, I'm on duty. Can I swing by the office?" And so they would swing by, and I'm sure they would check out on a walkthrough or something like that, know. And they would then tell me, here's what's happening, but they didn't want anybody else to know about it.
Right.
They didn't even want other people to know they had asked for any kind of help.
Right.
It's the macho thing, but it's also, man, maybe I'll lose my position if people know I can't handle this.
Yeah.
And so it makes you avoid help. And what seemed to happen, and I never asked people directly, but just kind of watching, they go to medicate in some way, whatever it is.
Right.
And I would say many probably turn to, they would go home and they start drinking when they get home
Right. Yeah.
because they're trying to deal with that.
Right.
And the ones that didn't reach out for help, well, then, I mean, that of course leads into other things. It
Right.
takes away from the family, stuff like that.
Right. Yeah. Andy Berger here, Texas Farm Bureau Insurance. After 15 years in law enforcement, I've decided to retire, and here I am with Farm Bureau Insurance in LaGrange, Fayette County, Texas. And I want to come to you and speak to you about life insurance. I know most of you folks probably have it through work, which is great. Fine, I had it too, right? So, but I want to do this for you. This is my gift to you guys and girls. I want to review your policies, all right? A bunch of those policies only pay out if you're killed in the line of duty. And that is not enough money to, one, probably pay off your mortgage, all right, or maintain the same standard of living that your family currently has now. You don't want your wife or your husband to marry out of necessity just because the breadwinner's gone. So contact me, 979-250-1100, or come to the office, make an appointment. We'll go over those policies, we'll review them, and allow me to build your generational wealth for you and your family, and also carry on your legacy. Do not, I repeat, do not make me show up to your funeral empty-handed. All right. Hey, y'all have a great day, and God bless y'all. That's I've seen a lot of officers that they deal with a traumatic situation, and they don't ask for help. They don't talk to somebody. They don't get that off their chest. They don't take those burdens out of their backpack, and they just sit there and they carry them around for years and years and years. And then, like you said, you start to use other things to try to mask the pain that you're going through. Whether it be alcohol, whether it be affairs outside of your marriage,
Right.
Hollering at your kid, whatever the case may be, you find another outlet to try to help that pain instead of dealing with it, right? So
I think that sometimes also they're not convinced that it'll actually help.
right.
And I mean, I can say I felt that way before. It's like, I'm gonna go talk to somebody. Is that really going to help me?
Right.
But now, personally, after having done it myself, I'm like, oh, this really does work.
Right.
This really can help.
Right.
And so I think that's also part of it. In addition to feeling like I can handle this and I'm strong, and officers are.
Right.
And my hat's off. They go through and can handle a lot. But part of it, I think, also is they might not even really be convinced that, well, I'm going to go talk to somebody and they're going to help me.
Right.
But the truth is, it does work.
Did you notice the officers that did have a connection to a church, whichever church it was, whatever, that had a relationship with God? Were those officers more willing to go talk to somebody that was like a faith-based person, as opposed to just like a random, like a counselor, or like like in a more clinical setting?
I mean, they would reach out first to, someone in the church or the pastor, or, something like that. And they would really try to finish it and handle it there. But that's not always enough.
Right.
So sometimes it requires other tools to be helpful.
Gotcha. Which actually, it's a good topic to lead into my next question, which is, how can spiritual health coexist with clinical style, like your more traditional mental health treatments, whether that be counseling or medication, that kind of stuff? How can those two worlds, because I mean, I think a lot of people would think that, oh, I just gotta pray hard enough, or I just gotta, have enough faith or whatever. But there's also a time when they can coexist with each other, complementing each other. And there's times where they do need to go and talk to somebody, with a clinical background that can help them get on some medication or get some professional, counseling or therapy to help them with their problem. How does that How does that work?
Yeah. So I think they definitely can coexist, and a lot of times you should be doing both.
Right.
Uh, you know, the spiritual side of it is the spiritual side of it. And then sometimes there's other factors involved, and you kind of alluded to it. Maybe you should just pray harder or believe harder or read more Bible, or go to church more often, or whatever it is. Well, those are great. I mean, it's great to do that. But if you're doing that and you're still struggling,
Hmm.
well, a lot of times it may be time to talk to that doctor, talk to the psychiatrist, or go to the professional counselor. Hey, listen, not all pastors are professional counselors.
Right.
And there are legitimate tools that have been studied. And I look at it this way. I believe that God gave the professional counseling, wherever that started, well, God gave people the intelligence to figure out the human mind and begin to work with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
God gave doctors and these companies that research these drugs, like, hey, he gave them the tools they needed and the intellect they needed to work on these things. Because sometimes there really is a physical or something chemically in the brain that needs help.
Yeah.
I heard in some of the trainings I've done, one of the uh, he's a professional counselor, and he's like, sometimes, yeah, you need spiritual help, but you're caught in a loop, and sometimes you might need a medication to help get you out of that loop before you can even grasp that you need additional things. And me personally, I've had a lot of training in Christian counseling and life coaching, and been the chaplain, and seen and talked to a lot of people over all these 30 years. And I know a lot of stuff, and I know the things to do.
Hmm.
But at some point, I even found myself and it had to be other people to tell me,
Yeah.
"Hey, Chad, I feel like you're struggling." Like, I'm not struggling. Are you kidding me? Like, I know everything.
Right.
But once two or three people told me, "Hey, I like you might need to like talk to somebody." Like, okay. And so I'm like, okay, that's what I'm gonna do. I feel at some point everybody should be in therapy
Uh-huh.
just to help. We go through things in life. So I started seeing a therapist, and then end up like, I go to the doctor, and they're like, "Hey, I feel like you might need some meds." And I'm like, medicine? But my wife looking at me like, "Hey, Chad, I think you need some help." I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
whatever it takes. And so you can be a Christian person following Jesus and going to church and doing all the things and take meds,
Right.
and it's okay.
Right.
I don't think meds are the answer to everything for everybody. And yeah, there are doctors that don't do it right,
Yeah.
and there's counselors that don't do it right. And if I could say, if you're seeing a counselor or a therapist or even a doctor of some sort, and they're not getting the job done, fire them and
Yeah.
go find another one.
Right.
They work for you, and go find one that you match with, because you may not match with everybody.
Yeah. That's good advice there. So, um, how important is it for a cop to reach out before they get all the way at the bottom? Like, to try to cut this off at the head, when they first start to notice things, or when their spouse or their significant other, whoever it is, comes to them, and, how important is it to try to address this early, instead of waiting until you're all the way at rock bottom and you've got a gun to your head,
Yeah.
and you're you know trying to figure out who's going to find you in the morning.
Yeah. It's vital. And once you start noticing that, or people start telling you, "Hey, you're more grouchy, or you're being more critical than usual," or you find yourself thinking about the same thing over and over, like, right then.
Right.
Uh, and I mean, there's programs like for the traumatic events you go, and just like I've described, and there's plenty of others that happen every day.
Yeah.
There are people that have already been trained to help walk you through that and begin to process that right away,
Yeah.
even before you start feeling the results of it,
Right.
because they know, it's been documented. They know what they're doing, and it's way better to take care of things early than get to the end of your rope, and
Mhm.
I mean, if you're at the end of your rope, call out for help.
Right.
But if you can get to help sooner, it makes the process easier.
Yeah.
Less people are damaged, and like most specifically the person going through it. And I would say, reach out right away.
Yeah.
And one thing I've heard, and cost doesn't have to stop you.
Right. Oh yeah, there's programs all over the place to
There's
help you.
yes, that will help, and usually that's the first default. Well, I can't afford $100 an hour, or whatever they charge, whatever it
Right.
is. Well, okay, like that's a lot.
Right.
And you're already working extra jobs, and you're already doing these things, and it's tough. At the same time, your mental health, without your mind, without your faculties, you're not going to be able to do those things.
Right. Yeah.
And so, I would say the earlier, the better.
Yeah. What would be some key takeaways for people who are, they're out here, they're working full time, whether they're in the narcotics field, whether they're on patrol, whatever type of law enforcement that they are in. What would be your advice to try to maintain that balance between the job and the other job that you have, which is at home, in order to try to stay and maintain a healthy relationship at home with your kids, with your spouse, and in addition to still dealing with all the stuff that we have to deal with on a daily basis?
I would say listen to what your spouse, what your kids are telling you,
Mm-hmm.
and you create a bond with your fellow officers.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times that bond goes beyond the workday,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody is like, hey, we're gonna play Call of Duty, or we're gonna do these things together
Right.
after work. Well, I would say, I mean, that's okay, create those bonds. But if you have a family at home,
Mm-hmm.
once work is over, turn your attention there and be present with them.
Right.
Listen to what they have to say. Of course, and I believe it wholeheartedly, take your family to church.
Right.
I know, and especially in patrol, usually it's every other weekend.
Right.
Because you're working every other weekend. Well, we'll go on the days you can.
Yeah.
And take them and kind of and engage with them there. Listening, I think, is huge.
Right.
But in the experience I've had, officers listen, but they're listening for those indicators that, hey, this person is lying, or they're listening in a different way.
Right.
When you're talking to your family, listen to, hey, Dad, will you throw this with me, or throw the ball with me, or your husband or your wife say, hey, can you listen to them and believe that they actually want you there.
Right.
They actually want you around, and they really do love you. They're not just trying to use you, which is what you get, all day in the public.
Right. Yeah, because it's, there's a lot of officers out there that get so caught up on this train that they're on, this train that is their career. They're on this ride, right? And everything that they do revolves around that, because you can't turn it off when you go home, but they're so intent on making everybody happy at work and being the best at this and the best at that. Well, the truth is at some point in time, that train is going to stop and you're going to have to get off, whether that's because of an injury, whether that's because it's retirement time, or whatever the case may be. And that train's going to take right back off without you. And the people that are sitting there at the train depot is your family that you just ignored for the last 25 years of your career.
Right.
And now what are you going to do? Right? Like, you don't have a relationship with your kids. You don't have a relationship with your spouse. Your kids are grown now. All those things that you took for granted while you're on that train ride. Well, I guarantee you, your position is going to be filled within 2 weeks with another person and that train's going to keep on chugging along, and you're going to be at home not knowing who the people are that you have in your life. So I think that's important as well.
Yeah, be present with them. When you're there.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good piece of advice. Well, we're just about out of time. I really appreciate you coming on the show today. Is there anything else that you would like to say or tell the listeners out there before we hop off?
I genuinely, with all my heart, I've like I said, I loved law enforcement, and after being around them and with them, and eventually accepted by them, hey, this guy is not just there to tell the chief what we're doing. It was none of that.
Right.
I was just there for them. My experience has been that officers, a lot of them really care, and I know that.
Yeah.
And in today's world, so many people act like they don't care, or they're out there to do wrong. There are more good people than bad people.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the officers. Your clients usually are people that are doing wrong.
Right.
But there are people out there that are for you.
Yeah.
I'm for you, and I'm honored just to ever talk to an officer.
Right.
And there's a lot of people out there that feel the same.
That's awesome. Well, like I said, I appreciate you taking your time out of your day to come talk with us. And until next time, guys, thanks for tuning in to Texas Narcos, and God bless, and we will see y'all next week. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Texas Narcos Podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. Remember to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, share our podcast with your friends and family. You can find Texas Narcos Podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. Your continued support helps us to bring you stories like the one you just heard. Thank you, God bless, and we'll see you down the road on Texas Narcos.